Hey everyone, and welcome to the 5 Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. Coming up on this week's episode, I'll do a deep dive into many of the announcements from Microsoft Ignite. Also, Microsoft rescinds deprecation for the AppV client and AppV sequencer. And a Facebook Malvertising campaign is targeting Bitwarden customers. For this and more, keep listening to this episode of the podcast, which of course, as always, is brought to you by my sponsors. And that includes Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops. And also brought to you by Master Packager, who make an application packaging software that helps you build packages that end users love, enterprises want, and the Windows OS needs. If you enjoy the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. Fair warning, this first story is going to take up most of the episode because it is the Microsoft Ignite announcements. So strap in. Microsoft Ignite was held this week in Chicago. Of course, not surprising was the fact that there was a keen focus on AI. A few weeks ago on this podcast, I covered the story about Microsoft launching the Copilot agents, and at the time I said I was a little befuddled because they were pretty vague in terms of the specific use cases. I had speculated that perhaps these would be chatbots backed by Copilot that are tailored to certain tasks. Well, at Ignite that was confirmed, but they gave some specific details around what some of these agents will be able to do. So for example, they shared the SharePoint agents, where customers can have agents tailored to specific SharePoint files, folders, or sites that support common business processes. These agents can be edited to have a personalized name and certain behaviors and can be shared across email, meetings, and chats, with users being able to ask the agents questions and getting real-time responses. The SharePoint agents are now generally available. There was also an employee self-service agent, which will be available in Microsoft 365 Copilot Business, and will expedite answers for the most common workplace policy-related questions and will take action on key HR and IT-related tasks. So for example, users can retrieve benefits and payroll information, start a leave of absence, request a new laptop with IT, and even get assistance for Microsoft 365 products and services all in the one place. Now, this agent is in private preview. It's not generally available yet, but to me, this sounds like one that would actually be pretty interesting to see and useful. There's also one called the Facilitator Agent, which will work within Teams meetings and chats for more effective collaboration. In meetings, it will take real-time notes, allowing everyone to co-author and collaborate seamlessly. In chats, it'll share a summary of important information as the conversation is happening. This agent is also just in preview, not available just yet. There's also an interpreter agent, which will enable real-time interpretation in Teams meetings in up to 9 languages, so each participant can speak and listen in the language of their choice. That one sounds really, really impressive, and they said the preview will be in early next year. There's also one for the project managers out there, and it will automate project management in Planner, handling everything from plan creation to executing tasks. They say the project manager agent can automatically create a new plan from scratch or use a pre-configured template. And then it will oversee the entire project, including the assignment of tasks, progress tracking, reminders and notifications, and status reporting. It can also complete tasks, including some content creation. And that agent is in preview. I think that could also potentially be a good one, although I'm guessing it'll be most effective if you have a template for it to use, right? Because you learn over time in your organization what is a realistic goal for certain resources and what the percentage of time they'll be able to contribute to a certain task is. Not to be left out in all of the AI hype is Copilot in Intune. And they say that with this, you will gain AI-guided insights to a broader range of scenarios, enabling IT teams to make more informed decisions and take quicker, more effective action when needed, which sounds a little bit vague, but rather nifty sounding was the auto patch in Intune using AI in order to help IT admins better manage and troubleshoot Windows auto patch devices. So I think that could be interesting because auto patch out of the box itself, it takes a very definitive control of the patching, but it might be useful to have AI, maybe separate the devices out in a more logical fashion than it currently does, and maybe AI will be able to, find unique attributes to certain devices that makes them a better candidate to be in different groups. There will also reportedly be an agent builder for Power Apps being made available. With Copilot Studio, the autonomous agentic capabilities that I also talked about on a previous episode of the podcast during the announcement for the agents. There's also this autonomous agent angle, but they're saying that with this, makers can build an agent that can take desired actions on their behalf without having to prompt the agent each time. They say autonomous agents will act in the background to respond to events like receiving an email or recording an uploaded file without the need for human interaction. And yeah, if you've worked with Microsoft support over the last year or so, my guess is they're already using this for their own support capabilities. And personally, from what I see, just through my own personal 365 account and putting in tickets, I'm a little bit cynical of what they're doing because it seems like it will automatically send you an email before they're about to run out of SLA. So that's maybe the negative side for customers in the use of AI, but it would be a positive to companies because it helps them stay within their SLA one way or another. During Ignite, Microsoft also announced capabilities that will allow users to upload images to agents built with Copilot Studio, as well as take audio input, which is probably not that surprising since the Copilot is backed by ChatGPT, and ChatGPT 4.0 introduced those capabilities too. Microsoft also shared plans to enhance Copilot in Teams to further analyze content presented in Teams and provide insights based on the content. So, for example, if someone is sharing a chart showing sales across the organization in different divisions, you may be able to ask it which branch or division had the highest sales, and it'll be able to tell you. So I don't want to spend the entire show or episode or even just this segment on Ignite announcements just talking about AI, because quite frankly, I'm a little fatigued when it comes to AI announcements, so I'll just cover a few more. But they also announced enhancements in Copilot in Excel, which you might be thinking, oh, okay, well, if you're only talking about a few more, why would you talk about such an insignificant piece? But personally, from using Copilot so far, my biggest disappointment was Copilot in Excel. It's just so limited in what it can do, but apparently they're bringing out a lot of enhancements, so I hope it'll be able to do things kind of more freeform within Excel spreadsheets and not need you to put things in a table and tell it to go to a certain table to take action. During the event, Microsoft also shared results of a study about generative AI use in enterprise, suggesting that Gen AI usage jumped from 55% in 2023 to 75% this year. And also, they say that for every $1 a company invests in Gen AI, the return on investment is $3.70. And on average, AI deployments are taking less than 8 months, and organizations are realizing value within 13 months. Also announced during Ignite was Azure Local, which they say is a new cloud-controlled hybrid infrastructure platform enabled by Azure Arc, and it's now generally available. So if you read into it, like I did, and I tried to, and I looked on social media to figure out what I was missing, this sure seems like they're rebranding Azure Arc and Azure Stack HCI's pairing into Azure Local, so it doesn't seem like it's necessarily a new cloud-controlled infrastructure platform, just by the way I read it. It's just branded as new. So, I don't know. Also on the Azure front, they announced some new desktop types or specs available that you could select in the compute gallery. They feature more GPUs and DPUs than are previously available, and is again being promoted for certain AI workload use cases. Some good news for desktop administrators: the Edge Management Service will be able to deploy both browser policies in the cloud and in Intune, they say, making it easier to keep users safer and streamline workflows. It's recommended as the go-to for browser-first concerns, and Intune obviously is so widely used in enterprises that making this available for deployment and management in Intune just makes sense. And this one is not generally available yet, it is just in preview. Also edge related, and I thought was pretty cool. They're saying that they're going to enable IT administrators to deploy an encrypted shared password to a specific set of users when needed, allowing them to sign into websites seamlessly without ever seeing or having access to the actual passwords. They say this will eliminate the risk associated with passwords being shared via email, chats, or paper, and it will help ensure that only the users designated by IT admins will have access to the common website or resource. And this one's only going to be available to Microsoft 365 Business Premium, E3, and E5 license holders, and it is coming to preview in the coming months. On the security side, they shared Microsoft Security Exposure Management, which they say will deliver a unified experience that empowers security decision makers and security practitioners to effectively assess and reduce exposure to cyber threats. They say exposure management will work together with extended detection and response, Microsoft Defender XDR, and GenAI Solution Security Copilot to provide complete protection for both pre- and post-breach situations through a unified SecOps platform. Also in the security space, but also end-user computing security specifically, they announced Microsoft Purview Customer Lockbox, which will provide data protection for Windows 365 by bringing users into the approval workflow process to help ensure only authorized requests allow access to content. And this one is already generally available. Also security related, but for Windows 365, Port 3389, which is obviously the RDP port, is now disabled by default for all newly provisioned and re-provisioned Windows 365 cloud PCs, and that change is effective now. And talking about Windows 365, Microsoft announced Windows 365 Link, which they say is a simple, secure, purpose-built device for Windows 365, and it will enable users to work securely in their familiar Windows desktop within Microsoft's cloud with responsive, high-fidelity experiences. And they're saying that this Link device, which effectively is a thin client, but a thin client that is only applicable to Windows 365 cloud PCs, will be retailing at $349 starting in April 2025. And it seems it's going to be limited at first to certain regions. That'll be Australia, Canada, Germany, Japan, New Zealand, the UK, and the US. And it's already actually in preview in those places today. So for the device itself, they're saying that it will support dual 4K monitors. It will have 4 USB ports, an audio port, an Ethernet port, Wi-Fi 6E, which I found surprising because it's already a little bit behind, Bluetooth 5.3, and it's going to support things like Microsoft Teams and WebEx, so it'll have that pass through and presumably provide a pretty good experience. They say it's a compact form factor, it's fanless, and it's lightweight. So I saw a lot of jokes being made online when this announcement was made. It's like, oh, like Microsoft is innovating by developing a thin client device. Thin client devices have been around for a long time, and people were not all that excited about it, particularly the fact that it's locked to Windows 365 and doesn't even support Azure Virtual Desktop yet. It would be interesting to see if they do open this up to things like maybe Citrix and Omnissa customers in the future, but right now it seems like a play to maybe upsell to Windows 365 Cloud PC customers. And I don't really hate on this announcement, to be honest. I think it kind of makes sense because AWS, Amazon had already announced their own thin clients about a year ago, so they're maybe just trying to close that gap that existed. Something that I was really excited to see was the announcement of Hot Patch for Windows, which is now in preview. You may recall I have covered probably over the last 2 years, it feels, the Hot Patch feature for Windows Server that seemed to be in preview for about 2 years before it was launched, generally available with Windows Server 2025. But with Hot Patch, if you're not familiar with it, your Windows updates are downloaded in the background and become effective immediately upon installation without a need to reboot the device or desktop. This will enable customers to work without interruptions while keeping systems protected with the latest security updates. So this is awesome. And I know just from experience, for my employer and show sponsor, Numescent, we recently launched a version of the Cloud Paging Player, our client software, that will eliminate the need for reboots during upgrades of the client. It was no small feat because it required significant re-engineering because our client has a service It's got drivers. So to have that happen and be able to update those kinds of components without requiring a reboot is pretty significant. And I'd imagine doing that at the desktop space where there's just so many variables, probably even more variables than on the server side, it's going to be quite challenging. So it'd be interesting to see if this is something that is going to be in preview for some time. But regardless, I'm excited for that to come to desktops in the future. Now, this is going to be unique to Windows 11. So maybe this will be the carrot that gets more customers to move to Windows 11. Kind of jumping all over the place here, but for Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop, they announced that there's going to be faster reauthentication, and that's in preview now, but it will allow IT admins to enforce reauthentication based on sign-in frequency policies too. They also announced FIDO and passkeys on Mac OS, which will provide a secure and passwordless way to sign in on Mac OS to your Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop machines. And this one's also generally available now. Also announced was SQL or SQL 2025, whichever way you like to say it. And this comes with improved security and performance. It'll support Entra managed identities for improved credential management and more. They say they've also made improvements to intelligent query optimization and query performance execution to improve workload performance and reduce troubleshooting requirements. They've improved the failover reliability and optimized locking as well, according to neowin.net. And of course, there's some AI goodness thrown in here too. Copilot is being introduced to SQL Management Studio going forward too. BleepyComputer.com reported on one of the kind of cooler aspects or announcements, in my opinion, that came out during the event, which is the Windows Quick Machine Recovery feature that they say will allow IT administrators to use Windows Update targeted fixes to remotely fix systems rendered unbootable. They say this new feature is part of a new Windows resiliency initiative that was launched as a response to, of course, the infamous CrowdStrike Falcon sensor update gone wrong that happened during the summer, when those affected said that their Windows host got stuck in a boot loop or showed the blue screen of death after installing that update. And to ensure that its customers, Microsoft customers that is, are ready in the event of a similar incident in the future, Microsoft has developed this feature that does not require hands-on access in order to fix Windows boot issues. Microsoft says this will roll out to Windows 11 insiders in early 2025. Also interesting, it was reported that Microsoft is working with security vendors as part of a Microsoft virus initiative to add new Windows features and tools that will allow security software to run outside the Windows kernel to avoid incidents like the CrowdStrike incident. Now, that's something I reported on 2 previous episodes of the podcast before, but the interesting aspect is there's a name for it, the Microsoft Virus Initiative, and just some more specifics around working to have those security products running outside of the Windows kernel. That was a point of contention because previously Microsoft had tried to do that, but there was a anti-competition investigation called for by security vendors because Microsoft would be able to keep running in the kernel themselves, whereas competing security products would not. So it'd be interesting to see how Microsoft handles that, because presumably they would have to have like Defender running outside the kernel too. Just to wrap up the Microsoft Ignite announcements, I saw that Citrix also made an announcement during the event that the hybrid license holders, so the universal hybrid license holders, will be able to use Citrix capabilities and features such as the HDX protocol, WEM, the Workspace Environment Manager, Uber Agent, and more for their Windows 365 cloud PCs at no additional cost. So you'll be getting that best-in-class performance, best-in-class in my opinion. It's better than the RDP protocol. The Citrix features are better than Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365 features in so many aspects, as well as other competitors. But you'll be able to layer in those best-in-class components on top of your Windows 365 cloud PCs to make that a better experience for your employees. And also on Microsoft partners making announcements during the event, I saw that my old friends ControlUp and previous show sponsors actually announced some of their own capabilities around Windows 365. It looks like they've enhanced the monitoring capabilities for Windows 365 cloud PCs, not just in the cloud PCs themselves, but also for that last mile. So For example, if today you've got employees using Windows 365 cloud PCs and they report a problem and you see on the actual desktop that it doesn't look like there is a problem, but they're saying they're having disconnects and all kinds of performance problems. If you don't have tooling today, you may not be able to help them. But if you have ControlUp, you'd actually be able to see what the network performance is from the client to the Windows 365 cloud PC and help them. Maybe they're too far from their router and they have a weak Wi-Fi. Or it can even show you if they're even using Wi-Fi or if they're using a hardwired Ethernet connection. So just really cool, powerful stuff again from ControlUp. And other partners made announcements themselves. I saw that Liquidware had announced new releases of their Profile Unity and FlexApp product, which I think the major headline, at least within their email, was about the support for App Attach, which is something I covered on a previous episode of the podcast, where Microsoft announced App Attach support by an integration from Liquidware, Omnissa, and Numescent. Well, I am exhausted. I didn't cover absolutely everything. There is a Ignite book of news that I would suggest you check out that covers everything if you have the time to read through it. I did read through pretty much everything. I just didn't script it all out. And I'll share a link to that with this episode, which is episode 361, and you can find that at 5bytespodcast.com. But a quick speed run of just some of the things that I didn't touch on that might pique your interest to read it. There was information on the admin protection mode in Windows 11. They announced shared mode for frontline cloud PCs, Azure Arc Gateway Service, a heap more AI announcements, and Microsoft 365 features, and more. So check that out for yourself. As stated in the headlines of today's episode, AppV is shifting to an extended support phase, which essentially means that deprecation of the AppV client and the AppV sequencer has been rescinded. Now, what this means is that the AppV client and the AppV sequencer will continue to be supported into the foreseeable future. However, the AppV full infrastructure, such as the management server, reporting services, and publishing servers that are available in MDOP, will still be end of life in April 2026. Honestly, this is not a huge surprise to me. They have been very vague over the last few years about AppV. They have said, AppV is end of life, AppV is end of life, and being very kind of widespread in that statement. I remember being at the App Manage event, and Tim Mangan, that is, was saying, it seems like Microsoft is pretty serious this time, that AppV is going to be end of life, and they're not going to go ahead and extend or delay that again. And there was someone from Microsoft in the crowd nodding the head up and down, and there's been people on podcasts who work for Microsoft saying that, AppV is going away, it's end of life. But if you listen to this podcast regularly, you may have listened to the episode where I talked about the Windows Server 2025 preview and the fact that if you went into PowerShell and tried to add the AppV client, it would add that AppV client for you and would have a message about deprecation. And it would include one of those short URLs that Microsoft has, was it aka.ms/. But the deprecation message only pointed to the existing MDOP product lifecycle page. And then if you were to look across the Windows client and AppV page, little subsection, it was different there. So at the time, I'd speculated thinking that, maybe the AppV client is going to continue to be in the OS, and even if it's deprecated, it's still going to be there for people to use past 2026. And then the AppV sequencer is made available in the ADKs, which are also released in conjunction with the OS. I was saying maybe the AppV sequencer would no longer be included in the ADKs, but it could continue to be put into the ADKs, but maybe not officially supported. But it seems like there's going to be official support. In the announcement, Microsoft said that it's not going to be actively developed, so they're not going to be developing any new features going forward for AppV, but they will be providing security bug fixes if required. So what does this mean, really? I would say it still means use AppV at your own risk. It's still going to be a big help because organizations who are worried about what would happen after 2026 and if Microsoft potentially put in an update that would break the AppV client, they don't have to worry about that anymore, because if they do break the AppV client, it seems they will apply these bug fixes. Now, how quickly they'll apply a bug fix, I don't know. It's still going to be kind of use at your own risk, in my opinion. But while the full infrastructure is still going away, Microsoft also took the opportunity to highlight the support of AppV packages in AppAttach and announced it as though it's new, although I believe in the documentation, the .appv package was listed there as one of the AppAttach options for about a year, I think. But maybe it hasn't really been promoted so much. But now, because there is a reason to promote it as an alternative to using the AppV full infrastructure, they're making an announcement about it now, because I saw that Jim Moyle published a blog about it the first day of Microsoft Ignite. So yeah, if you're using AppV packages, or maybe they're integrated in Citrix, or maybe through Microsoft Configuration Manager, sounds like you don't have to worry about bringing those applications forward right now. Although if you want something that is being actively developed, you probably should still consider it. And really long term, you should be looking at an alternative. And I know there's been a suggestion that that's MSIX, but really MSIX compatibility rate is still below AppV. I saw someone online suggesting this move to announce this could be a vote of no confidence from Microsoft in MSIX, which I'm not so sure about. It's probably just listening to some large customers who have a few existing AppV packages, and they said, hey, keep supporting us because we don't know what to do with these, and we need you to back us up on this. So a reprieve, which is good news, I think. BleepyComputer.com has reported that fake Bitwarden ads on Facebook are tricking people into installing a Chrome extension that steals data such as Facebook cookies, IP addresses, Facebook user details, geolocation, and more. Bitwarden users are advised by Bitwarden to ignore ads prompting extension updates, as Chrome extensions are automatically updated when the vendor releases a new version. And this may seem like something like, well, that's not something I'm going to fall for. But I've seen on family members' computers that they get like a toast notification down in the bottom right of their screen, and it's actually linked to an extension that was installed into Edge or Chrome. So it looks like it might be an actual legit prompt for a software update, and it doesn't even look like something coming from a browser, so they click on it. So just be careful out there. There are reports from Ars Technica that Starlink has re-established a waiting list, stating their stock in the US has sold out in places like Seattle, Spokane, Portland, San Diego, Sacramento, and Austin, with neighboring cities and towns also included in those sold-out zones. There's also additional sold-out areas in some small parts of Colorado, Montana, and North Carolina. Even some areas of Canada and Mexico are also reportedly sold out. And it's not really a surprise, I think, because particularly, say, where I am, where there's really rough weather in the winter, storms and stuff like that, it would really be great to have a backup satellite internet to rely on to continue working. And I'm sure others are facing that with the more extreme weather that's been happening over the last few years. So hopefully there's more stock coming soon, and hopefully there's more companies that are going to launch into this satellite internet type of space and deliver the same type of performance that Starlink can. The FTC in the United States is reportedly readying an investigation into whether Microsoft used anti-competitive tactics to maintain a dominant position in the cloud market. This is not necessarily news to you if you listen to this podcast regularly, but what I find interesting is that TechCrunch.com stated that FTC Chair Lina Khan may have her tenure ended with the start of Donald Trump's presidency, and that Trump is generally perceived as on the side of deregulation. So I avoid getting into politics on this podcast whenever I can, but I've been noticing and pointing out on this podcast that over the last few years, the European Commission and US regulators seem to be working more closely together in tackling some of the large tech companies for anti-competitive practices. And this investigation into Microsoft seemed to continue this. And although the FTC in the US is supposed to be operating somewhat independently to the actual federal government in its operations, it's clearly open to influence from the top. And obviously with the AI race, heads of state of the US who are very pro-deregulation are likely going to try and take the brakes off and allow them to go full speed to get ahead of competition in other places like For example, I think a French company is one of the main players in AI, but somewhere in Europe is probably more likely to have regulations to protect consumers and citizens. So it might be a pretty interesting turn now in 2025 and beyond. Final story for today, it looks like Blue Sky has now surpassed 20 million users, with reports that it's adding 1 million users every single day, and is certainly noticeable in our space, with many in the end user computing space, Microsoft MVPs, CTPs, and just enterprise IT pros in general joining. And there's some really great features like the verification process that you can tie to your own domain to show it's really you. No need to pay for a blue check. There's also, by default, the ability to post longer posts. Not too long. It is still limited, which I think is also a good thing. They're not amplifying any certain posts in replies. It's got nice search capabilities, really cool starter packs, and more. So if you're not on it yet, I suggest you try it out. But now this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. First up, Adam the Automator has shared a how-to on how to query REST APIs with PowerShell. It's a little bit of inception using PowerShell for that, but if you want to do it, there's a script and tip that I'll share with this episode. Another tip is from the awesome Sandy Zeng, who shared a tip for those who are using Intune and Autopilot. With a warning, if you're using the has provisioning completed registry or WMI to detect Autopilot ESP provisioning for whatever reason you may have, be careful. With Windows 11 24H2's feature upgrade, they have removed this information, so if you're relying on that, stop relying on it going forward. Finally, Waldek Mastykarz shared a script that you can use to remove old Entra App Registrations. So if you've tried to integrate a lot of products into Entra ID and you need to clean that up, check out this script. Well, if you stuck through this entire episode, way to go. This is longer than I usually like to go, but when there's a large event like Ignite, this is just what happens. So hopefully next week I'll be back to the usual length of episode. Thank you so much for listening.